I'm Michelle Shumate, and today we're going to be talking about pathways mapping, a method for social impact organizations and networks to understand their theory of change. What do I mean by a theory of change? Well, a theory of change, according to Andrea Anderson at the Aspen Roundtable, at its most basic level, is really about how a group of early and intermediate accomplishments add up to producing long-range outcomes and results. Ultimately, a theory of change is really about how all of those activities and programs and meetings should be adding up to a set of intermediate outcomes that then add up to a set of long-term results that the social impact organization or network seeks to achieve. A more complete theory of change also includes a couple of additional elements. One of them is that it articulates the assumptions that you're making about what is going on in the world. It might be assumptions about the market that a particular program exists in. It might be assumptions about the needed frameworks for behavior that will enable people to live more whole and complete and sustained lives. And those assumptions are important, especially as you begin to use a theory of change to track whether or not your interventions are actually leading to the long-term outcomes you seek to make. And that's one of the ways that you can begin to assess when things go off the road is, were my assumptions correct? The second thing that many theories of change incorporate is particular indicators that you are actually making progress. Some of these are leading indicators that are really about the outputs of the particular interventions. They might be the immediate results based on a survey or based on how many people attend a particular type of intervention. They aren't the actual change you hope to see, but they are indicators that at least some of those intermediate outcomes or those early accomplishments are happening. They also have some of these lagging indicators, which are further up the chain when it comes to theories of change. These lagging indicators are often of particular types of change that you don't directly in control, but that you hope will result or cascade from your interventions and those earlier accomplishments. Ultimately, to put it another way, theories of change are really about the relentless how. A relentless how. Have you ever heard of that? So I have a couple of kids, and when they were little, they were all about the relentless why. Why is the sky blue? Why is that? Why? Theories of change can somewhat be like the relentless how, that insistent question about how does that work? Well, then how does that happen? Well, then how does that work? Just to give you some specific hows that a theory of change might answer, how realistic is this particular goal? Can we actually accomplish this given our resources and our ability to intervene in the system? How does this intervention align with best practices? Do we in fact see the type of change that we hope this intervention would make? And if not, how can we make more of the change that we hope to see? And then how does the intervention actually work? What are the components, are the active ingredients to put into a metaphor that actually make a difference? And how much of this is just fluff that you don't need to invest in or spend time doing? A theory of change often is set up in terms of a diagram like this. And in the diagram, at the very top, we have our long-term outcome. That's the ultimate change that the network or social impact organization is hoping to see in the world. The intermediate outcomes are the things that are most proximate to the changes that you want to see in the long-term outcomes. These are the things that, if they were all to happen, would almost immediately add up to the long-term outcome. The preconditions are the things that influence those intermediate outcomes. And finally, the interventions are the things, programs, services, benefits that social impact organizations and networks do in order to achieve that goal. What's helpful in thinking about it this way is a couple of things. One, there are parts of a theory of change which your programs likely do not directly influence. They are things that are outside of your control. And here you're relying on domino effects in order to make that change. A domino effect is just like that long chain of dominoes. Your network's intervention or your social impacts organization's programs are pushing the first few dominoes in that series, and that you hope that this will cascade up to that long-term outcome. Second thing that I think is really helpful is that you can see exactly which interventions are designed to influence which preconditions, which then lead to which intermediate outcomes. That tractability about where that chain of events is supposed to happen often lays the groundwork for some really great indicators that then you can use to continue to refine your theory of change to make your organizations or your network's programs and services more impactful. So let me give a couple of examples to put meat on the bones. The first one is from Project Superwoman. This is one that comes out of Andrea Anderson's report on theories of change. But I really love the diagram and the way that this is laid out, and I find it fairly helpful to give you an example. So in that long diagram, you saw that there are many, many stop signs, right? Many, many boxes about the types of changes that you wanted to see. The one at the top is the long-term outcome. Their long-term employment at livable wage for domestic violence survivors. That's what they want to see in the world. That's the ultimate success. Now, long-term employment at a livable wage is not something that's going to happen immediately. In fact, you can't measure that immediately because it says long-term in the title, right? And so this is something that is not necessarily an immediate outcome of some of the programs that we're going to talk about here in a minute, but ultimately this is what they hope the cascading changes that they're making will add up to. Intermediate outcomes here, like survivors attaining coping skills and survivors enacting appropriate workplace behavior, are those intermediate outcomes. This means that a survivor in a workplace will continue to have the skills and opportunities to advance, to be able to get to that long-term employment and livable wage. Now, these are not behaviors that you can actually instill as part of your program's interventions. There are certain things that certainly can help, that can lead to this, but it's not something that you directly influence. In the diagram, there are these letters, and these letters are the articulation of the assumptions of the program. For example, here they have jobs that are available in non-traditional fields for women. And so one of the things that is an assumption of their program is that women are going to be able to have these long-term employment opportunities. That depends on the market. That's outside of their control. And so, but it is an important assumption in order for their model to work. At the bottom of that diagram, you begin to see some of those preconditions that we were talking about. Preconditions like enrolling in the program, or you have women attending training about expectations in the workplace. Here you can begin to see the measurable, immediate outcomes of the particular program's interventions, which are represented by the numbers in the circles. These interventions are all attached to particular preconditions in this case, which then lead to those intermediate outcomes. So you can see the chain of events that would need to occur in order for some of these programs to add up to the long-term outcomes. Let me give you a little more of a simplified example from my own work. One of the things I've been involved in the last several years is a program to promote a higher rate of Hispanic living kidney donation. The idea behind this is a particular way to reform hospital and transplant center care so that it is more culturally competent, and so that ultimately we see a reduction in disparities based upon ethnicity in terms of health outcomes for individuals with kidney disease. Living kidney donation, for those who don't know, is one of the best ways to improve quality of life and long-term health outcomes for people with kidney disease, better than dialysis or deceased kidney donation in terms of those outcomes. And so that's why it's the intervention that's got put forward here. What's most important, though, about this diagram is the way that you can begin to see the main effects and domino effects. Here, ultimately, you've seen the long-term outcome, and that's really influenced by two factors. You have to have more Hispanic patients who are evaluated for that living kidney donation, and you have to have more donors who are stepping up as volunteers who are willing to donate that kidney. Now, this process, this link between that willingness to donate and that willingness to become evaluated and that outcome is not something that you can really intervene in, at least not readily. These processes are protected by a lot of regulation to ensure equity, to ensure that everybody's rights are protected. And so this is where you have to depend on domino effects. If you can just get more people in the system, your hope is that the domino effect will ultimately lead to this higher rate of living kidney donation. But in order to get more patients evaluated and more people volunteering to donate, there were particular sets of things that we wanted them to do. In this case, I wanted them to attend sessions where they were getting educated, where we were learning about barriers, where they were understanding the process. That was one of those outcomes of the interventions. And we hope to see some attitude change, which was identified as a primary barrier to individuals deciding to volunteer to donate. Here you can see the interventions led to these preconditions, which led to the intermediate outcomes, which led to ultimately to the long-term outcome. So how, as a social impact organization or network, do you get there? One of the things that is really helpful is to think about this in terms of backward design. And backward design is very common in education and some types of program development. The idea is to start with, what do you want to happen? What's the desired result? And then what are the things that have to change in order to get there? These may or may not be things that you can directly control, and that's all right. You have to determine what are all of the intermediate outcomes that lead to ultimately a long-term change. And then finally, you have to ask yourself, what are the things that you're going to do to create those intermediate outcomes? And that's where you begin to identify existing or new interventions that are going to influence those intermediate outcomes and ultimately should lead to the long-term change. It's a backwards process. You start with the end in mind and work your way towards activities, not vice versa. So ultimately, what I'd encourage any social impact organization or network who is watching this video to think about is, how do you end up doing this for your nonprofit, for your social impact organization, or for your network? What's your long-term outcome? What are the changes that need to happen in order for your organization or network to achieve its long-term outcome? And then how do the activities of your organization or network add up to those intermediate outcomes and ultimately to the change you want to see in the world? Thanks so much.